A Jujutsu sorcerer is a con artist. The most important thing that we can learn from this fight, aside from Megumi's growth in showcasing in this fight, however, it was a key trait that was showcased throughout this whole colony in which Megumi showed why he is him. But first, one thing that is very interesting, and before the whole conflict began, we got to learn some interesting things, with Reggie being the only person who actually correctly guessed the whole front of the CUlling game was a scam to showcase Kenjaku's ultimate plan. He successfully predicted that there could be a deadlock which would allow the cursed energy to continuously fluctuate due to the sorcerers would be able to continuously fight against each other. As well as he was one of the few people to correctly guess that these are just layers of Kenjaku's plan based on his hunch, and that this was all in an essence to do something that would suffice his plan, which we were currently unaware of, and we have now become more aware due to the more recent chapters. At the beginning, we get to see that Megumi was obviously holding himself back because he was trying to negotiate a potential team up with Reggie where he could get all the points to be able to enact a new rule in the CUlling game. Reggie then declines, and Megumi gets hit off guard by another sorcerer in which he uses his shadows to hide in the ground and to throw this sorcerer out of the window. He also then uses No Way, which on contact has an electric type effect, similar to that with Kashimo and his cursed energy trait. He was then sent onto the ground, and Megumi's Shikigami in Divine Dog gets hit by Reggie's ability, which two knives are sent to the top of the dog. This is one of the most important things because 1. Reggie believed that Divine Dog had died at this moment of time, and this would be key to his eventual downfall at the end of the colony. Now we got to learn one of the most craziest abilities, which comes from Hazinoki, who basically can use his flesh as bombs to attack people. The good thing with his ability is he has obviously reverse curse technique. He can restore the eyes and etc. that he's lost, and his ability is one of the craziest that we've seen in the series. We also see Remy begin to try attack Megumi as well, and Megumi begins to talk to her to tell her to run away because this individual showcases that he does not care about him. However, Remy decides to decline because she wants people to protect her, and I'm interested to see what would happen in the future with her character, because currently she was pretty annoying, but I'm pretty sure there is something we're going to see in the future. Now we got to meet another sorcerer who was part of Reggie's united front called Hari, and Hari was on the other side of the door getting to engage with Megumi, who was in a bad situation about to be involved in a 4v1 conflict. And then the key information came, that Itadori had fulfilled his purpose in his fight against Higuruma, which allowed him to make the transfer of points as Rule 10. By adding this rule, Megumi had no other reason to hold back and could now maximize his utility in fights and begins to completely body Hari. So he first uses Max Elephant, which sends Hari out of the building. By using the way, he holds onto the bird, in which he does to then get in close while Hari is free falling. While free falling, we see him get into his toji bag, where he pulls out the knife and stabs him in the face, and by doing so while they land onto the debris and onto the ground, he finishes the blow with a sword which cuts up Hari and he completely stomps him. He then gains 5 points from killing his first sorcerer, and Reggie begins to be appalled that an individual lost to Megumi without using his curse technique. We then see Hazinoki begin to use his bombs, in which he spat out a tooth to try explode at Megumi. And then we get mentioned to the GOAT, my guy Takaba, who comes in with one of the most broken abilities named Comedian, in whatever he finds funny will become reality. So now we begin in the new conflict, and we see that Megumi and Takaba begin to make an alliance. Hazinoki begins to fight with Takaba, and Reggie begins to fight with Megumi. But before that, we get some elite level jokes from my boy Takaba, who makes a marry me and be my wife 5. Yeah, he's not the best joke, but unfortunately this leads to the start of the conflict, in which he sends a double kick and sends Hazunoki flying. They begin their conflict, and then we see Megumi begin to try sneak up on Reggie by using his shadows from the bottom to try grab him, and Reggie begins to evade, and then we begin the final conflict between these sorcerers. As we see Hazunoki use his eyes as an explosive, we see Takaba send back the blow and it explodes on the building. They begin to engage in hand-to-hand combat, and we get a nice shout out to the Thousand Fingers from Death from Naruto, where he hits Hazunoki and he sends him flying. This then leads to the fight with Megumi vs Reggie. So Megumi begins with Max Elephant, and he sprays the water to go and attack Reggie. Reggie, as he flamboyantly does, begins to dodge, and we see Megumi jumps off the building to try catch Reggie off guard. He uses his new Shikigami with the rabbits, while Reggie uses his ability of contracts to then create a receipt in which he uses a net to catch the respective rabbits. Megumi then bounces off the chains on the side posts, in which he then begins to try and catch Reggie off guard. Reggie then counters by using his receipts ability to make multiple knives, which he throws at Megumi, who begins to deflect all of them. This is the start of their battle of attrition and high IQ fight, where they begin to weigh in on each other's abilities, and we learn how broken Reggie's ability is. One thing that is interesting is Megumi is one, still hurt, has used his curse technique already a couple times before the main fight has begun, as well as took the explosive damage from Hazunoki, while Reggie has managed to restore his full body by using his receipts, by using it in a way which he would have been fresh from coming out from a 5-star resort and in a spa. So now the fight begins, and Megumi begins to assess the situation. One thing that is interesting is that Reggie begins to make assumptions, and we can understand how information is extremely important in Jujutsu fights. He thinks that Megumi is one limited, and that he cannot use his divine dog, which I have talked about is going to be Reggie's downfall as we go into the future. And he also makes another assumption that they both lack big moves, so we have to basically get into a battle of attrition. Megumi begins to play on that thought, and then uses this to his advantage to use no way to fly away and then begin to go into the gymnasium. As he's in the gymnasium, and us as the audience know that this is beneficial for him to be able to use his domain to maximum effect, Reggie begins to assess the situation before going in, and Title drops one of the most important lines, which is a sorcerer is nothing but a con artist. We see the 2 trucks get sent at Megumi, and Megumi hides between both of them to avoid the clash, and then he gets hit by his ability of receipts, to which flower pots hits him at the top of his head, and Reggie goes from behind him and begins to overpower him in hand-to-hand combat. He then uses his ability in which he throws a daikon, which is basically a radish, and by the radish he hides a knife in which one catches Megumi off guard and hits him on his arm. Reggie then sends a kick to Megumi, and then Reggie showcases how his ability has similarities of Megumi's Shikigami. To learn more in the way that his ability of receipts can act like a Shikigami, simple commands, he can then utilize them in a better way. And this is where the first assumption that Reggie didn't know is that he was unaware that he was facing a sorcerer capable of a domain in which Megumi pulls out Chimera Shadow Guard. Now that the domain has been casted, we see Reggie begin to use Hollow Wicker Basket, which is an original form of new Shadow style simple domain, and it neutralizes a domain to negate the guaranteed hit. However, Reggie is still affected by the shadow frogs that we see in Megumi's domain, and we obviously know as the audience that Megumi has not completed his domain, meaning that Hollow Wicker Basket would not be affected. We also get to learn some important information in regard to how different domain counters works against domain. For example, the little text here, we see that Jogo and Hajime use domain amplification in Shibuya. It was powerful enough to include a curse technique that was sure to kill. However, by not activating your curse technique, you can basically allow the curse technique from Gojo's Limitless to flow naturally into that embedded space, and it's kind of like an empty swimming pool. So let's say the domain amplification is the empty swimming pool, and by not embedding his curse technique, the Limitless would then go into it, allowing it to be neutralized and allowing them to be able to fight against Gojo. However, Hollow Wicker Basket and Simple Domains cannot neutralize a curse technique themselves. They basically prevent the barrier around it, which means that things such as Sukuna's Domain should not be affected by Hollow Wicker Basket or Simple Domains because they only target the outside barrier, not the curse technique imbued itself. This allowed Megumi to take advantage, in which he could use his whole shadows as well as make clones to extend the 10 shadows technique and basically get a 120% buff, which he begins to take advantage. So now using the rabbits, he begins to hold Reggie in place, and then Megumi summons clones in tandem with his rabbits to begin to overpower Reggie. He sends a kick to his back, a punch to his stomach. He then has the rabbits hold him in place, and Reggie uses his ability of receipts to cut the said rabbits to then prevent himself from being stuck. He then gets caught off guard where Megumi gets Reggie into an ankle lock, and then he begins to use his sword to try attack him. Reggie manages to dodge, however is still getting jumped by the respective clones, and he dodges the first sword strike but gets hit by an elbow, in which he begins to get completely overwhelmed. This begins to put him in a bad situation, and he begins to use his big brain IQ moves to begin to understand his technique and different ways in which he can deal against Megumi. He summons a pool of water and then reinforces his curse energy onto his footing to prevent himself from getting sucked in by the shadows. Pause. This whole domain is your shadow. Being able to store and take things out must be handy. He realizes that the main thing is that you are forced to bear the weight of what you keep stored in your shadow. This becomes the biggest weakness because with somebody who can constantly summon whatever receipts he writes on and burn with cursed energy, he can begin to summon different things to pile on the weight against Megumi. So as he's beginning to do so, Megumi hits him with a Uno reverse, in which he summons a shadow from above him and summons Max Elephant on top of Reggie. Now we get some important information in which the domain increases the curse technique's precision, so it replicates the exact weight of an actual elephant. This causes Reggie's fibula and heel bone to get fractured, and these two combatants begin their final bout in a battle of attrition to see who can prevent themselves from getting crushed to death. Reggie begins to then think some more. He believes if he dispels his domain, he doesn't know if he would be affected by the shadows. He also begins to think that if he had kept the trucks, he could impact Megumi more by adding more things with more weight. And just when he's about to use his receipts to try to get him out of a crisis, begins to get sucked in by the shadows, and in which he cannot breathe, and Megumi begins to take advantage. So as he's constantly sinking, Megumi is waiting to see that he has been killed. Reggie uses a big brain move in which he summons with his receipt a car to send him from the shadows to prevent him from suffocating. So now we get to the final stages, which he now uses his trump card, in which he then summons a house of 132 square meters to try and crush Megumi. Megumi then performs another big brain play, in which he dispels his domain, meaning the effects of the house then crushes the gymnasium floor, and then now in the swimming pool, in which Megumi goes from behind him to try strangle him. While he's doing so, he escapes, first going underneath his shadows while the respective houses fall, and then it breaks the gymnasium, which causes 1. Reggie to not be able to burn his curse energy onto his receipts, preventing him from using his curse technique, and then Megumi manages to escape and prevent himself from being crushed by the respective houses. And this comes full circle to my favorite quote, which is a Jujutsu sorcerer is a con artist. At this moment of time, they begin their final stages of hand-to-hand combat, in which Reggie then begins to fight first and uses a punch in which Megumi then manages to counter with his sword. At this point of time, Reggie is expecting him to summon his Shikigami. However, he believes Divine Dog is not available, so he's a little bit more careless because he thinks the minute he tries to do so, he will catch Megumi off guard and begin to capitalize. So, after Reggie begins to overpower him slightly in the hand-to-hand combat and sends multiple kicks, once Reggie is beginning and getting confident and thinks he's about to win, Divine Dog sneaks from behind him and completely rips half of his body. Megumi tells him that was not nearly enough to take out Divine Dog, and Reggie closes with his famous line of, "A sorcerer is nothing but a con artist." I think that line completely encapsulates what it means to be a sorcerer in a fight. By constantly withholding information and managing to get a one-up on your opponent, especially when it's in a battle of attrition, and in Megumi's case, a person who directly counters his domain. So when we get to that ending part, where Reggie accepts that he was outsmarted by a modern day sorcerer, he begins to ask him some questions in relation to Master Tengen and what would be occurring with the CUlling game. However, he believed there is so much more to come from the CUlling game, and he thought it would be interesting, and he leaves us with one of the craziest conclusions, which he says, "So please, after all, you're my executioner, let fate toy with you before you die like a fool." And this, as the audience, is one of the most significant cliffhangers because it could indicate to us that potentially Megumi has been cursed, or this is a foreshadowing of a very tragic conclusion for our boy. But regardless, Reggie's ability is crazy, and Megumi managed to come on top against a sorcerer who directly counters his ability. And he never once decided to look for Muhuraga, as well as showcase his trust in his friends who managed to get the points. This showcased great growth for Megumi, who is one of my favorite characters, and he showcased a great level of Jujutsu knowledge, being able to get one up on his opponent, who Reggie is a very intelligent fighter himself. We then get the conclusion of Hazunoki and Takaba, in which Hazunoki decides that he doesn't want to fight anymore because Reggie's star had passed away. This potentially means we could see him in the future. Takaba then gets his points, and we then get to learn more about how his curse technique is capable of opposing even Gojo. The colony ends at the end with Megumi pulling up on Remy, with he is about to kill her but decides to let her go, in which he hears a voice telling him no Megumi, in which he could assume was his conscience, such as Sumiki. We then get to a point where Megumi passes out after exhausting his curse energy reserves, in which Angel takes Megumi, and this leads to the end of the colony. What an amazing fight! Like I said at the start, this and Mahito Mekamaru in my opinion is the most underrated fights, and it showed why Megumi is him and was able to come out against a person who directly counted his biggest asset being his domain expansion. But thank you guys for watching. What did you think about this breakdown? I think this sets up nicely for Megumi's eventually honored one moment, which I did a video on that soon, so you should probably check that out if you rated this video, and make sure to check out all my links in the description, and thank you guys for watching.